Welcome to another episode of the Christian Cornerstone podcast, brought to you by Mr. Bill Ricksecker, yours truly, and Michael White. Today we are continuing our journey through the book of the 52 greatest stories of the Bible, brought to us by Kenneth Boa and John Allen Turner. I apologize, I'm kind of still getting over a cold right now. But before we get into this, I do want to let you know we have a lot of excitement that's happening. If you haven't followed us, if you haven't found out already on social media, Michael actually had the idea a few weeks ago, so we decided to go ahead and, try it out, see what happens. What we have is after the show. Yes, that's what it's called, after the show. After our episode, after this recording here, what we do is we get together for 10, 15 minutes and just share some additional thoughts, if I can talk correctly, additional thoughts on the episode of what's in question, how it applies to our life, and so on, and a bunch of little random stuff that we happen to think of. That's why it's called After the Show. After the show, we can have bloopers. Anyways, so we have that we're doing, and it is on YouTube. It's a video format. It is on our YouTube channel. We'll put the link in the description below, and you can also find it on our Facebook as well. We're promoting it there, and you can look up Christian Cornerstone Ministries or Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries. I cannot talk today. Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries on YouTube, and you can find that there. It is called After the Show. It is dated year 24, episode, whatever that is. So be sure to check that out, have fun, share with your friends, and so on. Now, before we do get into this episode, I did want to share this with you. A lot of excitement is happening. I am so excited to share this with you. As of this recording, as of you're listening, it is already purchased. But I am going to be purchasing a subscription to a learning platform that we're going to use in the development of this ministry to develop courses and curriculum to help you better improve your biblical understanding. Not only are we going to have some freebies such as this podcast, such as the videos that we throw on YouTube and whatever else have you, but we'll also have some paid material, which of course is a way in which you can support this ministry. And this learning platform, the purpose of this is to help equip the saints for the work of ministry. So if you feel called into whatever that is, if you want to go deeper than what we do provide already, we will begin, or are beginning, I should say, begin developing courses. There is one right now available on YouTube, which will be moved here soon. Christian mentorship that will be available on our website, on our Institute platform is what we will be calling it. And so that'll be available free of charge. There's going to be some freebie courses on there, but ultimately we want to try to put it in an educational format so that way you can better have a better platform to learn, keep track as far as what you've watched, what you've learned, and so on, share with your friends. And ultimately, what we would like to see happen with this learning platform is not only it be, in the future, Lord willing, an actual Bible Institute, but our goal is to have this so that way you have something in which you can use to equip you for the work of ministry in whatever that field might be. So that is what we want to do. We want to help to equip the next generation of believers, and we're starting with a Christian mentorship course. And I just finished writing notes for a series on the book of Romans. So I will begin recording those lessons, and Lord willing, my goal is to have that released on the end of March. And at that point, we'll share the platform with everybody and begin promoting it. There's only going to be 2 courses at that point in time, but I want to share it early because I want you guys to share in this excitement and see the growth as it continues to develop and continues to develop. It's really exciting, really fun. The only reason I'm sharing this with you early is because I am so excited about this, to get this milestone and to see what happens. So keep up to date, subscribe, like, share, do all that stuff. So you can keep up to date with what we are doing on our end, and how you can benefit from this, and not only how you can benefit, but how you can learn the Bible and to share that with others. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started into this episode. So, Michael, before we get started on this, I want to put you in the hot seat. And this was, I mentioned this to you the other day, that I had something to share with you. And what...
Oh, man.
This, I have to, it's got to start with a question, because it ends with a certain comment. This is going to be a make it or break it. This is going to decide our friendship. This is going to decide our partnership. This is going to decide your reputation for the rest of your life, your current, how do I say this? Your current standing with the Lord. Are you saved or
immigration
unsaved?
Status. I was like, how does that work? But yeah, keep going. Kick me out of America.
So, my question, there is a right answer and there is a wrong answer. Okay? No pressure.
Alrighty.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Initially, growing up, I did not like it, so I would just go with that as my initial answer. But as I've grown up, I just like the fruit itself. So I would have them separately probably,
Yeah.
But in general, I don't like the vegetables. I think pizza should just be meat. The meat lovers all the way.
See, and I'm that way when I eat my pizzas too. And I just do that because it's more filling. You eat less slices with the whole meat lovers. But I bring that up because I have a friend of mine in which we've got this dispute. They say pineapple does not belong on pizza and call me a heretic for believing that it does belong on pizza. To their benefit, I don't eat pineapple on pizza a lot, but I don't have any problem with it. So each one of us pretty much condemns the other one because of their pineapple views. The reason I bring that up, I received a screenshot from them. What happened was one of their friends apparently stumbled across our podcast. They sent a link to the channel Spotify. There was this whole Spotify link. Sent it to this friend that we have in common, and asked the question: "Is like, hey, have you heard of these people? Are they legit? Is it good?" That alone, I thought was really cool because this, as far as I'm personally aware of, this is some random person that is wherever they live, and we have this mutual friend in common. And to my knowledge, this individual has no idea our mutual friend has, somehow affiliated, friendship. And I've had them critique some stuff. I was like, hey, I have this to write up. What do you think? When he's changed. What was really cool about that is they says like, yeah, this is legit. And I just thought it was just really cool to see how the podcast is getting out there. So that's the fun thing that I had to share with you.
Yeah, and if you stick for the after show, you can see that we're legit too, and see what see what we're wearing. Oh, ew. Yeah. We are wearing clothes.
Yeah, and I wasn't able to mention that in the last episode. I was sick, like right when I got into editing. I was stuffed up and everything. I was like, I'm just gonna go ahead and pass on this, today. But they shared that with me, and they asked, or they said that, yeah, it's legit. I had the whole screenshot of that short conversation with them. Then they commented and is like, well, I probably should have told them that they're like not a credible source of biblical understanding, education, truth, whatever you want to go with. He's a blasphemer and a heretic because he likes pineapple on pizza. Like, that's what they said. It's like, I should have said this. And I was like, well, not all of us can be perfect. So I keep praying for you. But, so yeah, that was really the cool thing. And I do want to mention this. I actually just found the name out today, I think is what it was, maybe last night, because they commented on one of the episodes. So for your privacy, we're not going to share your last name, but Jennifer, I do want to commend you. If you're listening to this, I do want to commend you for what you did, for asking a second opinion if they've heard of this podcast, what they think about it. That's what noble Bereans are supposed to do, and that's awesome. It shows that you're not just looking for an episode that says Christian or slaps a cross on it. but that you're looking for some solid biblical understanding. So I commend you for your efforts in wherever you are in your Christian walk. And I pray that the Lord continues to draw you deeper and deeper into his word and closer to his son, Jesus Christ. Now that the cat's out of the bag, where are we at, Michael? Well, I guess I didn't even ask you how your week went. What's going on? Anything new, exciting going on there? Or are we ready to dive in?
I think we can jump in. Yeah, nothing's new, just the same old trying to be patient with how slow life is going, but at the same time it's going pretty fast. But yeah, I don't mind jumping in with the verses. They're kind of an overview of what we're going through today, but we are, if you didn't catch the update on the social media for CC412, we're going through Joshua 1 through 6, and I'll go ahead and give you a highlight, and then Bill will jump right in with our deep dive. But starting off in chapter 1, Moses has died. Bum, bum, bum. And God is telling Joshua, who is his guy who comes after, who's going to lead the people into the promised land, that they're going to cross the Jordan River, kind of reaffirming all of the promises he gave, starting back with Abraham of like, you're going to be a nation, this is going to be your land. So it's kind of bringing them back to the land of Canaan. So it's God kind of charging him for what's coming up. Then chapter 2, they send spies, and that's with Rahab and the spies. Rahab hides the spies, saves their lives, and because of that, her and her whole family will be saved in the upcoming chapters. So we'll get to that. Chapter 3, they are crossing the Jordan, and their feet have to touch the water first, and then it stopped. That's something that I'm sure we'll bring back up. And then the priests had the Ark of the Covenant, and they stood in the middle of the river while the whole nation of Israel crossed. Chapter 4, they grab, and Joshua tells them to grab 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan to remember what God did for them. Chapter 5, everyone is circumcised. Passover, and then the day after this, the manna officially stops, which I thought was really interesting because for this whole time while they've been wandering in the desert, God has been providing manna and quail for them, and this is like, we are getting you to that promised land. You are eating from the land now. I don't need to give you manna. And then, I have they ate produce of the land, which is coming then. From then on will be from Canaan. And then in chapter 5 too, Joshua meets the commander of the army of the Lord and, bows down. Are you for me? Are you against me? All of that, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. Chapter 6, we have the fall of Jericho. They're marching. The walls come down. Rahab is spared. Everyone is killed in the city and the whole city is burned down, which is like, I always think such a bummer whenever I realize that as an adult. I'm like, they killed everyone, even all the animals. I'm like, that alone is very brutal. And then they burned everything, even when we're looking later on with Israel and their temple. So much of history is gone because that was a custom of you conquer, you destroy, you kill, you wipe them off. And I think even in this reading or right after, God tells them you will never build here again, cursed, you will be cursed if you try to rebuild Jericho. Do not do that. But handing it over to you, Bill. Let's go.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was thinking about this today, I was kind of mediocrely getting cleaned up after work because I come home, I eat, and then we connect. But I was thinking about that, it just randomly popped into my head, is there's really a lot here that affirms God. I mean, one of the common things that we have today is, well, if God is real, then why? Or if, or, insert issue here. That's one of the really things that stood out to me with the devotional. God is making himself known that he's not like other gods. And in our society today, they want to put all these different religious views equal to each other. Jesus Christ is equal to Muhammad, is equal to other whatever you want to go with, and other religions, other gods, the deities, but he's not. And throughout this is really what we see. But what's interesting is Jericho is one of those examples, because the walls of Jericho, Jericho's been found, if I remember correctly. I think there's might be some theories as far as this is Jericho, that's Jericho. I'd have to look at the information as far as what we have on the archaeological discoveries, but I do know that a place has been found and is believed to be Jericho. What I find to be interesting about that is people are always wanting some sort of proof as far as, if your God is real, then show me. this is just one of the many examples that we have here is Jericho falls, and this is chapter 6. But Jericho falls, that's a historical piece. And here 2,000, well, actually, I guess probably 4,000, maybe 3,000. I don't know the dating specifically as far as when this event's happening. But at least 3,000 approximately, this is an unscholarly number, years have passed, and we have proof that Jericho was, in fact, at one point a real city. And that's just one of the many, many that we'll find throughout the scriptures, comparisons to other cultures, historical documents, pointing to certain events that are in common with each other, such as the flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for an example, is the Babylonian account. And it's just really, really amazing. And I think really when we get past that pride and realize is, when we're asked, like as Christians, when we're asked, prove to me your God is real. I think we're at a point where, we can make that effort, but I think we're at a point in which we can say, much like God did, or Jesus when he's talking about Lazarus and the rich young ruler who wanted to show his father's or his brother's proof. Jesus' response, or more specifically Abraham's response, was if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced if a man comes back from the dead. And that's the same way with us. Is like, you're asked all of this proof. Show me your God's real. Show me your God's real. It's like there is literally, we'll say 6,000 years of history that prove that. And if you're not going to look to that, there's nothing that I could convince you. I can give you the gospel at best. But you're asking me for tangible proof. There it is. The flood, Jericho. I have a couple replicas in my collection. Isaiah's seal, Hezekiah. Actually, no, not Hezekiah. I don't have his yet. Pilate's ring, and a few other things. The tablet of Tel Dan. All of these things is just evidence that the historical accounts that we find in the Bible, such as Jericho, are valid. So that doesn't even get us to our text for today. But some of the things I really had a hard time, like I shared prior to this, that I had a hard time writing this. And I had to stop at Joshua chapter 1 because I looked back, and this is very challenging for me to do, to limit what I'm putting down here. But I realized this is like, if I was to basically repeat or duplicate what I have here for Joshua, go on with the next 6 chapters, Joshua 1 through 6, we're not going to be getting through it all. So I just wrote down some notes for chapter 1, and I've got some other thoughts, but I didn't write those down, so we'll kind of intermingle those in our discussion. But one of the things that really stands out to me, the biggest thing that stood out to me, because I actually found myself listening to this at work a few days ago. Well, I actually have it here in bold. Joshua 1 verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise and go to the Jordan, and you and all this people into the land that I am giving you, to the people of Israel. The word in that verse, the word that stands to me is arise. And that's not just a means of, okay, well, dust your shoes off, put on your sandals, put your coffee down, and let's get going. This is a means of take charge, stand strong, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But God is appointing Joshua, Moses, your descendant, your master, your ancestor. No, the man who was teaching you. There you go.
I almost said that before, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm using the right term, but I think this is the right context to use. Yeah. The one who came before you.
Yeah, he's gone, and now it's your turn to take up that mantle. That's what this arise is saying. And I stopped. I actually had to, because it was the audio Bible I was listening to, and I had to re-listen to it again, and found myself, I didn't have them here, but I had to look up what that word meant in the Hebrew, and that's basically what I said is to take charge. couple different other definitions you can give, but that's ultimately what's being said here is you have this authority. You are the leader of the people. You are the new Moses, so to speak. What I think is really interesting, and like I had to dig into this a little bit because I could not get it out of my head. I mean, I was kind of seeing more or less the gospel, or not the gospel, but the Great Commission kind of being spoken here. It's not exactly here. It's not 100%, but I mean, how I was reading this and how I was hearing it, that's what it kind of appeared as. Joshua 1, 5 through 8 says that no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to the fathers to give to them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you, and do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, and you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you'll have good success. I also have it noted there in verse 9 that be strong and courageous is a third thing that's happening here. Joshua, I had to look this up. Joshua is probably about, let me double check this number here. He is an approximately 52 years old at this point in time. And what's being read here is how that's known is because in Joshua chapter 24, it tells us that he was 110 years when he died. Somebody else did the math, of course, and they came up with about 59 years old when this happened, or 52. So he's in his 50s. I mean, this is not just some 20-year-old, 30-year-old in his prime, very strong buff. I mean, he's probably strong and buff considering, his lifestyle. By our understanding of 59, 52, mid-50s, we'll just call that a safe number. This is a man who should be falling apart. I'm 35 years old, and I feel like, I'll be 35 here in a few months. I'm almost 35, and I feel like I'm falling apart sometimes. If that is even close to how Joshua was, which I don't necessarily think it is, considering his lifestyle, I think he was pretty physically fit. But regardless, I mean, he's getting up in ages, and it's time to look for a successor. And I could be wrong on that. I mean, I'm kind of having mixed thoughts on it now because you think at this point, he was just appointed to be the next in charge after Moses. So culturally, it might have been about, 40s or 50s when they pass on the mantle or something. I don't know those particular numbers. But he has a lot ahead of him, as we find out in the next few chapters. He's basically taking an entire city, flipping it over and saying, this is ours now. One of the things I find interesting, because this is really kind of an argument that people throw out is, well, if God is so loving, then why does he do this? Or why does he let these things happen? We find that the Canaanites were very wicked people. And I think maybe we have at least 400 years, maybe 5 or so, from the time of, actually more than that, from the time of the flood. And I say that because the Canaanites were ultimately descendants of Ham, which I think we mentioned that in a couple episodes ago. So they know of, or should at least, know of the God of the Jews, the God of Israel. And we see that with Rahab, with her conversation where she makes it clear, it's like, we've heard of this God, we've heard of your God and what he can do, I'm not ready to die. Can you do something to save me? Kind of concept. So the reputation of the God of Israel is known. The thing is they've turned their backs so far. I tried to find a quick article that could explain, like a summarization of how deep in wickedness the Canaanites were. I was not personally able to, but you compare this to other pagan religions of that time. Child sacrifices, obviously idolatry, because we're worshiping false gods. A lot of fornication, incest, and every sort of wickedness and sin that a person could commit is probably being done in Canaan at this time. So the question isn't, why would a loving God do this? It's well, I guess it would be, but they're asking the right question, but they're expecting the wrong answer. And I bring that up because how people see this, they see this as God is saying, go kill some people. I want to see bloodshed. I want to delight in this, or, whatever's going through their head. I don't personally know. I haven't really had that in-depth of a conversation with an individual to know. But it always comes down to, this is not good. Killing people is not good, or destroying a nation is not good. But they're being judged for their sins against God. They're gross, they're sick, they're perversions that they've done as a people, and have had plenty of time to repent. They've heard of the God, as we see with Rahab in chapter 2. So they know who he is, they know what he asks, and they know he's real. This is not just some people that God is just staying back and saying, yeah, go ahead and do that. This is not just a pillaging of people taking over land for any sort of power. This is all God using a people to bring his divine justice and judgment upon a people who have committed so many heinous crimes against him, dealing with the penalty of those sins. So, before I get into any more, Michael, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think even you see with God's chosen people, the Israelites, Moses didn't even get to see the promised land. All of those people who were with it from Egypt, and they died. Like, they had to wander until everyone died. And it was the new generation. And I think Joshua and Caleb were the only older guys that got to see kind of the transition happen of all these people dying. Even Moses, who Joshua came up under, did not get to make it. But I think he got to see it. That was the thing. God showed him the promised land, but it was you cannot have it.
Right.
But he at least got to see it.
You can look, but you can't touch.
You see, God even has expectations, and when sin comes into play, he is a fair and just God, and so he's even disciplining his own children, which that's a huge bummer. Of course, yeah. You can't see the promised land. You're going to die in the desert, and all of these young people, they got to be the new generation, and it's definitely sin is that's what it all comes back to, is sin is in the world, and that's what happens. And you see, even as we started at the beginning of the Bible, the people that made the decision to walk away from God, their descendants are who we're seeing now that make up all of these people groups. I think when people have preached on this, they're the Hittites, there's so many ites.
Every single ites, yeah.
Later on in Joshua, they're and they beat these ites and these ites and ites and ites and ites. And where do they come from? Well, just go back from where we started, and you'll see reading the notes and the commentary, it all splits away of when you're not doing life with God, you are not his chosen people.
Right.
And that's kind of the path that you're headed down. And even the last episode where we talked about the law that God gave them was because it was a wicked world. And God was okay, you're now my people. I'm going to teach you how to live as a nation. And this is what I'm holding you to. And everyone else who is not following that, not acknowledging the God, then, you kind of open yourself up to damnation and hell. Which sounds awful, but same today too. You have the chance to have that relationship with Jesus, to turn away from sin and have salvation, but it's a choice. And that's something I think people that are against the God of the Old Testament, which, newsflash, same God, don't understand the whole story and how it leads us to the New Testament. But I think we'll get into that more. But I think that's a good starting ground to know is it's sin. All that you read, it can be horrible to read, and you don't nowadays we can't really think of that. But also, look at the news. We kill so many people. America itself is got its fingers. We're funding the people who are running from war, but we're also funding the people who are doing war against them. So even today, we don't see the same as tear down a whole city and burn them, but there's still sin everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the ways I try to look at it when I'm talking to people about, if God is loving, if he's real and so on, then why this? Taking this judgment on these people, the Canaanites and, Hittites and everything that you were, all the ites and ites and ites. That's a good example. I mean, I think the best way to bring that down to is on a personal level, because ultimately, at its core, this is people who have broken the law, broken God's law. If we're saying that, well, that's unfair, or that's unjust, that's unloving, then let's get away with the justice system that we have in place today. Somebody breaks into a car, let them go, because it's wrong for them to be go to prison or pay a fine or whatever it is that they have to do, because they were just breaking into this car so that they can get something, so that they can go buy a burger or, whatever else it is. If somebody kills somebody, well, if there's a system in place, obviously, to find out if it was just and not. But if not, they're put away as well. They've got to pay due penalty for their crimes. It's like, well, if it's wrong for that, it's like, well, you can look at it and say, it's like, well, this person was just angry at this person because they were causing so much trouble in their life, and, some sort of other excuse to justify the murder, and, whatever else. I mean, if you're not, I think ultimately how we need to look at it is if we're not, I don't want to say that's acceptable or accepting of God enforcing his law, then we shouldn't be that way with our local and federal laws either. Let everybody get away with what they want, and don't put anybody in prison, don't give anybody a fine, none of that, because there's no standard. You're getting rid of the ultimate standard, and the rest of it is based on your own personal moral judgment. And therefore, if that's the case, then let's just go ahead and make the entire world in that same judgment. Next thing you know, chaos instills, and it's everywhere. There's no order of any kind. And I think we got off track there, but...
Well, I can bring it back around, because I would say
bring it back
the
around.
Other side of that, too, is you see, even within this wicked city, when you put your faith in God, he can still save you. Or even if you are, say, a murderer, there is still hope for you because of what Jesus did on the cross. But with Rahab specifically, she's mentioned in Hebrews. And I've just found it while you're talking, but starting Hebrews 11, I'll start in 30 because it mentions Jericho, so
okay.
Yay. But it says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. 31, by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. So I think that is like the juxtaposition. I don't know if that's the right use of it, but it shows like his wrath is coming on the city. Same Sodom and Gomorrah, like Lot barely scraped out of there alive.
Right.
But he is willing to save someone who, in the case of Rahab, had faith. She knows that God is real. And so I think that's also encouraging, is like with the condemnation that comes and the damnation, like what we deserve, there is like, he leaves a way for us to come to him. And I think Rahab's a great example of that, of like, she was a prostitute. Like, yeah. What? And whatever that means in those days, it's not a good thing. And so to see like God can use someone like that to further his own purpose and plan, and like she was able to save her whole family because of that. It's just like crazy.
Yeah, and there's really not a lot that we know about her family, or as far as a prostitute, yeah, you could probably take that to worst case scenario. But
got lots of kids, maybe.
That's one way to look at it. But I mean, it shows that even the active people, God will, he can bring his mercy on it. And he did. I mean, she's saying, hey, please save me and my family. And okay, well, make sure they're inside and make sure you have a cord out your window so we know not to go knocking on that door. God is okay with that. I mean, there's no indication that we see here that he's opposed to that. Say, hey, I told you to knock down these walls. I told you to go kill everybody. Why is she still around? She repented of her sins. She realized, it's like, hey, I mean, obviously, and I'm playing into this because we don't have a lot backstory here, but she's realizing what's happening, growing up in this pagan, this wicked nation of whatever that might have specifically consisted of, and then the Jews are here. You know what that means.
They're coming for their promised land. Yeah. We've been mooching off it, getting the benefit of the promised land, but it's not our land.
Yeah. And, so she's seeing this reality that's taking place. She's heard about the parting of the Red Sea, the 10 plagues, and everything else that leads up to where we're at here in Joshua. And so there's a sense like, okay, this guy is real. It's not just like our gods. This guy is real. But let me see where I was here on these notes here. So going back to being strong and courageous, this is the third time that God said these words, and technically would be the fourth time, because this was, well, I would say an echo. It was originally spoken by Moses to Joshua in his, let me see, I actually have it here in my commentary. He was commissioned. Okay, no, yes, same verse, 31. I don't have it here. Okay. So he's basically appointed. He's got a lay of hands, so to speak, by Moses. Deuteronomy 31, verse 6. I don't have the verse here, but it's Moses saying, be strong and courageous. And this is actually a commentary from MacArthur, what he says on that particular verse. The strength and courage of the warriors of Israel would come from their confidence that their God was with them and would not forsake them. Moses repeated the substance of his exhortation, this time addressing it specifically to Joshua in the presence of the people to encourage him and remind the people that Joshua's leadership was being assumed with the full approval of God. So I was reading that, and what I'm seeing here is that within that the first instance of be strong and courageous in Deuteronomy 31, this is Moses saying, hey, be strong and courageous, speaking directly to Joshua. And then here, what we have in Joshua chapter 1, this is God saying those same words to Joshua, to be strong and courageous. And not only once, twice, but 3 times he's saying this. So this is very strong. And the whole number 3, as far as repetition like that's a normal way of speaking during that time. And it means as an affirmation of absolute, I would say, absolutism. I might have that word wrong. But this is encouragement to Joshua. It's like, yeah, I remember when Moses said these things, and now God is telling me directly. He's affirming what Moses already said. And this is really where his strength is coming from. It's not just be strong on your own, be courageous on your own. It's Joshua, I'm the God that followed Moses, that led Moses. I'm the God that brought the people out of Egypt. I'm the God that parted the sea. And so he's going in, to an impossible task. Like we said, he's 50 some odd years old, against not just 1, 2, but a number of different nations that were against God. And God is making it clear. It's like, you're not going alone, Joshua. You're not leading these people alone. These Israelites you're taking, they're not alone either, because you have your army. Don't worry, I brought mine with me too. So you've got these angelic hosts going in as well, whether they're seen or not. I don't think that's really relevant, but there's not only a physical battle taking place here, but the spiritual battle as well. What I see here is really the power that God is bringing. And what I love about this, I was actually had to read a little bit more of the devotional, because I don't know if I mentioned it before we recorded and after we started recording, but I wanted to try to pull a little bit more out of the devotional. One of the things I thought was interesting, let me see if I can't scroll down here. It talks about, and before I get into this, because I want to kind of get some additional thoughts from you, unless you're still reading, because I heard some clickety-clacketing going on.
No, I'm good to jump in. I was going to add something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a very common verse. Everyone, like every lettering to every poster, like some of you listening, you have this up in your house.
Hold on. Can I guess what it is?
Yeah, please.
I've got 2 guesses. I can't remember word for word, but either one, you're going to bring Jeremiah 21, or I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
No, it's what we're reading today.
Oh, okay.
Be strong and courageous. That's like such a popular one. But yeah, those ones, for I know the plans I have, I think that's 29 maybe, but
yeah,
29:11.
You're right.
But like, it's so common. But then I also wonder, so he was one of the spies, right? That him and Caleb were the ones that brought back a good report. Because of that, they trusted God. He said, you guys are going to get to go. Like, you get to, hooray, you don't have to die in the desert.
Right.
But they're still humans. They still saw the giants, the walls. Like, those other spies that reported bad about it were just so afraid, and they didn't trust God. But that's not to say that the 2 that brought back the good report weren't afraid, like humanly afraid of, like, we can't do this on our own. So I think that's cool context to bring back into perspective of, like, like he was an old man maybe at this point, but you still have those images of like, if they were giant people, of like the walls, I'm sure they could see from a very
Right.
far away, like, man, this is a lot we're doing. Plus the devotional mentions like the Jordan at that time, I think, was flooding. So it's like very strong current. And that was like their first thing that they need to do is like to get you to this promised land, which is not even talking about the wall. You got to
Right.
cross the Jordan, and you're going to have to trust me to do that, because that alone is not something you could do. Like a whole nation, maybe some of the strong guys could make it, but even them, they would probably be dead. But if you're talking about women, children, your livestock, your tents, everything with you, like, we got to move a lot of junk across this giant river right now.
Right. Yeah, I what I loved about that, I mean, that's like, I wouldn't say the first, because I mean, we've already have a few that are happening, but maybe with Joshua's leadership, we could say that's the first. The first test of faith is dipping your toes in the water, because like you said, they have to put their feet in first before they can actually cross, before it will clear up. And I think that's really how it is with us. Is like, yeah, you've got this rushing torrent of water that will kill you. The moment you put your foot in there, you're going to be dragged off. I mean, that's how we see things throughout life. But and I think of this so many different times, so much. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think of an instance many years ago where I had a challenge. Is either confront or walk away. And I was already determined to walk away. I was like, it's not worth it. I'm kind of young in the faith. I don't know, or I can't really back up my case. I believe what I believe, but I don't have enough experience and understanding to be able to back it up. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to step away. But I remember reading, and it was from James, because I was actually sharing this with my pastor a few weeks ago. For the longest time, I thought it was in Timothy. But I remember reading in my Bible, "Don't run," and there's more to it. But those words stood out to me, and I was at that point, I was ready to just turn back. I was ready to I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to go a different direction. This fuss is not worth it. But when I read those words, I mean, it was because I was battling with it. I was like, I've already decided, but at the same time, I'm not sure if this is the right decision. So when I saw this whole "don't run" in there, I was like, God, I don't like that answer, but okay. So anyways, I confronted the situation, and, I'm very grateful for it, because it strengthened me. It really did. I mean, it was a very terrible experience to go through, but I'm really grateful for it. I would not take it back, because it's helped to turn me into who I am today. And that's what we need to recognize when we're faced with these things, is that we need to, is like, yeah, it looks like you're going to die. It looks like you're going to get pulled off by the river. It looks like you might not be qualified, or whatever your justification is to avoid the particular issue. But we need to recognize that those are the ways in which we grow the most. Is there's this rushing torrent of water in front of me, and if I step my foot in there, I'm going to be dragged off. But God is saying, is like, no, if you put your foot in there, you're showing me that you trust me. And then I'm going to stop the waters. So, I don't remember how I'm going to... Do you want to swing this back around? Because I wanted to kind of get to some of these notes, but I don't think I'm going to.
Yeah, so I think that was the main thing in the devotional, if we're kind of finishing up on the devotional for the next part, where I don't even think they mentioned Jericho. And I read that first, and then I got to the Bible. I'm like, did they literally just talk about crossing the Jordan, and they skipped like the coolest Bible story of the walls tumbling down? But
I saw that.
I think they did it because that was kind of their takeaway, was that, these people have been promised the promised land for centuries, I guess you could say, right? At this point, like, they've been told this, and God's giving them a way to do it. So they know what God has planned for them, but they have to follow him and trust him and have faith, and that they can't do it alone. They can't cross the river. Like a lot of in our lives too, like, we could not do it on our own, but with God, and if the plan he has for you is like being confident and having faith in him that, okay, he can take you through this. By ourselves, no, you probably couldn't. You would be
Right.
swept away. But I think that was what they really hit on, is that God is there and he will be there, but you got to put some work in it too. Like, you have to be sometimes the one to take that step. If like,
Yeah.
why isn't life going well? Why, like, oh, I think I want to do this, or, like, have your own business. And like, you got to take that step and God can take you. But if you're not going to take it, a business is not just going to fall in your lap.
Right.
And that's
Right.
kind of in your story too, of like, you didn't know if you should do it. And then you felt very clear, like, you should. But then
Yeah.
guess what? You actually have to take those steps and do
Yeah.
it.
And I think that's really where we struggle with that. And I'll get to the devotional, because I got some stuff here that's devotional shared that I thought was rather interesting. But I think that's really where we struggle, because when we usually when we're praying, we're asking God, do this for me, or God, help me with this, and we're expecting it to happen a different way. But let's say, well, I've got my books for an example. It's a big one I like to share. I have that entire collection. I have that passion. It came from me asking God, I'm willing to reject everything I know about Christianity right now, if only you would teach me. And this was a man who completely hated reading books. It was very hard for me to turn a page of any book, and with the exception of a comic book, of course. So it was very difficult for me. And then when I began praying that, it's just like, ooh, piece of candy, ooh, piece of candy, ooh, piece of candy. I need more books, because all these books that I have, and there's going to be some people who says, well, you need the Bible. It's like, you're absolutely right. I had the Bible. I have my Bible. These other books, they help bring a deeper understanding to the Bible. And, some historical, cultural, all sorts of different types of stuff related. And they all point to, this is what's going on in the Bible kind of concept. So there's that. But I think really when it comes down to prayer is, we expect things to happen, and we don't realize that God may have already answered it. Like, we could be praying, God, help me through this, or, give me this, or such and such, whatever the issue is. But we don't recognize that God is sometimes responding, I've given you the resources. For an example, this ministry itself, the vision is to be, obviously we're doing them right now, podcasts to help others understand the word more and apply it to their lives, to build a Bible Institute. More coming later, I will tell you that. I'm really excited to share some. And, all of these different things. And really, there's obviously more to it, but I've got a computer. I know how to write. I've got a webcam. I've got a microphone. All the resources that are needed, with the exception of finances and teams and, everything else to come with it. There's still a lot ahead, but as far as the basics, God has given, me as an individual, God has given me the tools to get started. And I think when we look at stuff like that, we'll use that. We use this whole ministry, the whole institute kind of concept. Is like, yeah, we're not at a place where I can just quit my job right now, spend 40 hours a week focused on writing and teaching materials. I can't go out and buy a building for this ministry right now. Would all of that be really cool to do? Absolutely. But it's got to start somewhere. And if we're not able to use the little in which God has given us, there's no point in him giving more. And so I think when it comes to these things, we need to recognize, instead of say, God, do this, ask God, show me what you've provided. I know it's there, but help me, humble me and help me to see through your eyes. And then when we do, we'll see, okay, God's provided X amount of finances for whatever it is. He's provided certain people for your support, whether it be a ministry team or whether you're going through a struggle and you need some sort of emotional support, your vehicle, whatever the particular issue is. There's something there in your life God has already given you. Work with that. So one of the things I thought was rather interesting, and then we'll close up with this and get a few other thoughts here from you. But I thought was interesting what they pointed out. I was like, wow, I didn't even consider that. Here's what they have to say. It says they have heard stories of their now deceased parents about stuff like this, unexplainable miracles and divine works. They've witnessed God's protection, provision in the desert, but perhaps they've wondered if he was, like so many gods, bound to geography. In other words, was God limited to a certain region? And this is what happens here, is that he's not. The fact that he's going through them through the wilderness shows that he's not bound to a building. He's not bound to any sort of region. He is the God of all gods and in control of everything. But it continues on with that particular passage. The whole point was that they didn't need to worry about numbers, about size, about strength. They just had to follow God, who has... I thought this was interesting. I had to read it a second time. They just had to follow the God who has stubbornly refused to abandon them. And that's true. It's like God saying, it's like, dude, you guys are stuck with me. I'm not going to abandon you. It's a good thing we have learned that lesson. I thought this was actually funny when I was reading that. It's a good thing we've learned that lesson and never have to worry about silly, trivial things anymore. Oh, wait. That piece was in the book. But what I thought was interesting is that they're pointing out here the limitations of other gods versus the God of the Jews, the God of creation. Is God limited? No. The Egyptians, they had their gods, a pantheon of gods. The Greeks and Romans, which will obviously come later through history as we progress through this year. But all these other different pagan religions, they've got multiple gods for different things. Literally anything you can think about doing, there's a god for that. So, and each of those gods is limited within those things, in those pagan religions. But for God to step out of a particular region, such as Egypt as an example, that shows that he's not bound to Egypt. For God to wander through the wilderness, that shows that he's not just the God of the wilderness. Why? Because he was also in Egypt with them too. And everywhere else that they go throughout this, God is setting that example and saying, it's like, I'm bigger than your gods. Egypt, you have Osiris, you have Nut, you have a lot of the other names that I can't even pronounce. Well, they're limited. And I'm in charge. Now, we've already talked about how those were actually demons. And this is really what they're dealing with here within Canaan as well. Not only is God proving that he is not bound by anything, but he's also going and basically cleaning house. Showing that, in this case, Canaan, you have your gods. You have your, 50, 100, whatever that is, gods for all your different things. But guess what? All we have is one. And he's still stronger than all of yours combined. And I think that's not the primary thing, but that's one of the messages that's being played out by God is you've got multiple that are limited. And I'm just one and I'm not. So,
yeah, and I like how even back with Jacob, because with my church's Bible reading, we're on to Joseph now, so hooray. But back with Jacob, he told him, I will go with you wherever you go, because he was departing and going on a journey. And when you look in the notes, it explains exactly that. Like there was a lot of local gods. And so when you would leave a town, you'd hope and pray that the next God and the next city would help you. And that's what sets God apart, is that he will be with you. And then that's how we even see it now, is that God is still with us today. And then he gave his son. And then we have the Holy Spirit in us too. So even more so than, I guess you could say, they had back then, like they had God, yeah. And we have that. And like, how cool is it that even now we can have the Holy Spirit within us that is leading and guiding us, and just how it's all set up. But I think if you want to point it towards, how does this point us to Jesus as we get to the end, so we can hit that in there, because you have some good notes within that too.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to point out. Because I actually had to flip. I don't have the book. I forgot to bring it in the office, but I was looking through that the other day. I was putting these notes together, and I was a little bummed out we weren't going to get to this piece. Joshua chapter 24, 14 through 20. Now, I don't have the full context here as far as the background of what's going on, but Joseph is really given this final decree. And chapter 24, 14-20 says this: "Now obey the Lord and worship him with integrity and loyalty. Put aside the gods of your ancestors, worship beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and worship the Lord. If you have no desire to worship the Lord, then choose today whom you will worship." Some translations, and I like this translation, say who you'll serve, but ultimately it's the same word. "Whether it be the gods of your ancestors, worship beyond the Euphrates, or the God of the Amorites in those land you are living, but I and my family will worship the Lord." So I like that, and I think this is really something we can get, because when it comes to the conquest, like I said, the torrents of the waters, that's really what it comes down to. Are we going to worship God through those times, or are we going to live in fear and doubt? And that itself, I was listening to actually one of those reels on Facebook, which pointed that out, is that's the sin of doubt or sin of distrust, in those moments, is to say that God, I've learned this, that you're all big and you're all powerful, but my fear and everything's taking over, and I don't believe that to be true. So that's something we need to recognize, because in that it's not saying you're a false worshiper of any sort, but in those moments of fear and doubt and worry, when we come across these obstacles, we're in a moment, even if it's temporary, where we're failing to worship the Lord. So, with that, I would throw the challenge to the audience. Are you going to worship a God of limitations, or are you going to worship a God of strength and of power? So, how does this point to Jesus Christ? That's what we want to get through. And, I get worked up. I get all excited about this, because every time I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking gospel. And I was actually listening to... the one that individual commented on was the first one I did on Galatians, no other gospel. And so that's the only thing that's going through my head today, is no other gospel, only one gospel. We need the gospel. And it is absolutely true, but we'll leave that for another time. How does this point to Jesus? How does this event of Joshua 1-6, the promised land and everything, point to him? Well, the first thing is here that we have is that Joshua is a type of Christ. Just as Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land, Jesus leads the believers into a spiritual promised land of salvation and eternal life. Joshua's name means Yahweh is salvation, or Yahweh saves. And then another way which this points to Jesus Christ is the promised land itself. It's a land that's flowing with milk and honey, which symbolizes the abundant life that believers have in Jesus Christ. John 10:10 as an example. And it represents not just a physical blessing, but also a spiritual blessing of inheritance in Christ in Ephesians 1:3. So, that's what we can do when we read this. Look at Joshua and what's interesting about this, actually, it didn't just cross my mind. Depending on your translation, your culture, Joshua's name is Jesus. I've known that for. Yeah, I've known that for a while. Yeah, but
they mentioned that.
It didn't even think of me as I was writing up these notes. So, it's just kind of interesting to think. It's not just Joshua that's leading these people, that's being called to rise up and have strength and courage. It's quote unquote Jesus. So I just thought that was kind of cool. I just noticed that, and which is funny, because his name means the Lord saves, or Yahweh saves. So. I'm just blessed.
Can't get much better than that, right?
No, I can't. I'm just tossing it around. I'm like, man, that is so cool. This is how this points to Joshua being an example, character perhaps, of the character of Jesus Christ and who he is, what he will do for his people and what he does for us. So I think that is all I have for this. Michael, do you have anything else, or do we save this for after the show?
I would just say, to wrap up before we get to the after show, is just kind of going over, God can have the plan set for your life, but you do have to be willing to have faith, take those steps. You can be scared, but God will be there to give you the courage, the strength to get through it. So it's not bad unless it's holding you back and produces the doubt to not follow what God wants for you. But all in all, I think it's just a really encouraging story to read through that actually did happen in the Bible, and then seeing like the God of then is the same as now. And that leads to what we just finished with, is like made a way for Jesus to come on this earth to then lead us to salvation and eternal life. So I think in the context of all of that, it is really cool, and bringing it to our daily lives is like, you gotta work hard for that, because it's not just a relationship that you can turn away from and like, oh, it's like any other relationship we would have, like even with me and you, like you have to keep in communication, you have to work on it. So I think that's kind of the tricky part.
Sometimes you have to block him because he just talks too much too.
But yeah, I think that's good for now, and we'll pick it up, but throwing it back to you.
All right, yeah, I think that's it. For those of you who are listening, if you have any questions, comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, Jennifer, you who made that comment on our post, again, I just want to commend you for your efforts. I want to commend you for getting a second thought, for looking into this, and not just trusting us because we say Christian, because we mention the Bible. Completely awesome. I read that and I was like, this is somebody who wants truth. So that's what we strive to do. And if there's anything you have any comments on, questions, comments, concerns, if we say something wrong, we'd love to hear from you, because our desire is to bring you the biblical truth. And any misdirection, we would love and welcome correction on that.
Thank you for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider supporting this ministry. You can do so in a number of ways. You can comment and rate the show. Your interaction will help us improve the show and also help others find us. You can share the show and ministry with your friends in order to help strengthen their walk of faith. And finally, you can support us financially by becoming a supporting member. Members will have early access to content created, as well as discounted or free material as a special thanks through our Patreon platform. And that's not all. As a supporting member, you have the chance of being invited onto the show as a special guest to share your own story. I'm Michael White, and this is Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministry Podcast.